Listen closely. There is a moment in every emotionally exhausting connection when something inside you finally shifts. A moment when you stop over-explaining, stop chasing, stop sending long messages, stop trying to prove your worth to someone who keeps pulling away, and it feels quiet, almost anticlimactic. No dramatic goodbye, no explosion, just silence, just distance, just you choosing yourself. But inside the avoidant, something very different begins to happen. They don't tell you this. They don't post about it. They don't admit it, even to themselves. But when you stop chasing an avoidant, they go through a psychological and emotional breakdown that moves through predictable stages. Not in a dramatic, emotional way like an anxious person might, but in subtle, internal, disorienting ways that shake their sense of control. And today you're going to understand exactly what happens inside them the moment you stop chasing. You chased because you cared. You reached out because you felt the connection. You tried to fix misunderstandings because you wanted closeness. You lowered your needs because you didn't want to lose them. You waited because you believed in their potential. But the moment you stop, something ancient and primal inside the avoidant wakes up. They built their identity around independence, emotional distance, and not needing anyone. They learned early that closeness equals pain, rejection or suffocation. So they learned to pull away, detach, shut down, and stay in control. When you chased them, it confirmed their worldview. I'm in control. They need me. I don't need them. Chasing gave them power. Chasing gave them certainty. Chasing allowed them to stay emotionally asleep while still receiving connection, validation, and affection on their terms. But when you stop chasing, you remove the emotional ground beneath their feet. At first, they might not even notice consciously. They are used to people adjusting, pursuing, explaining, apologizing. They assume you'll be back. They assume you'll send another message. They assume you'll chase again like before. Then something subtle shifts. Your energy changes. The emotional supply disappears. The pressure they once felt is gone, but so is the reassurance, and that's when the first stage begins. Inside them there is confusion. Not dramatic confusion, not crying on the floor confusion, but a quiet cognitive and emotional disorientation. They sense the absence. They feel the difference in communication, in tone, in frequency. They notice that you're not reacting the same way. You're not pushing, you're not asking for reassurance, you're not trying to fix things, and that unsettles them. Avoidants rely heavily on emotional predictability. They like knowing where people stand. They like having emotional distance while still being wanted. When you stop chasing, you become unpredictable, and unpredictability triggers their attachment system. They might think, they're just busy, or they're probably testing me, or they'll come back. But something doesn't feel right. They start replaying conversations. They start noticing your absence more than your presence ever registered before. And here's the paradox. When you were chasing, they felt overwhelmed by closeness. When you stop, they feel destabilized by distance. This is the emotional contradiction inside the avoidant nervous system. Then stage 2 begins, and it's more complex than most people expect. At first, they feel relief. No messages, no emotional demands, no pressure to respond, no expectations to be vulnerable. They feel free, they feel lighter, they feel like they got what they wanted. But beneath that relief, something emptier creeps in. They realize the silence feels different this time. It's not just space, they feel the absence of your emotional energy. They miss the familiarity of your presence. They miss being thought of, being checked on, being emotionally prioritized. Avoidants often confuse relief with happiness, but when the relief fades, what remains is a strange loneliness. They won't label it that way. They might call it boredom, restlessness, or distraction, but it's loneliness. They were attached to you in their own suppressed way. They liked knowing you were there. They liked having the option of closeness without fully engaging. When you remove yourself, you remove that safety net. And suddenly, their independence doesn't feel as satisfying. They might start scrolling more, working more, distracting themselves, dating casually, watching videos, anything to avoid feeling the emptiness that follows the disappearance of someone who cared deeply. Then stage 3 begins, and this is where their curiosity turns outward. They start checking. They check your social media, they watch your stories, they notice if you've changed your profile picture, they observe who you interact with, they wonder if you've moved on, they notice your silence more intensely than they noticed your presence. They won't reach out directly at first. That would require vulnerability. Instead, they gather information from a distance. They want to know if you're still emotionally available. They want to know if you're still thinking about them. They want reassurance without having to ask for it. This is why avoidants sometimes reappear in subtle ways, liking old posts, sending a neutral message, asking a random question, commenting on something unrelated. It's not always because they want the relationship back. Sometimes it's simply because they want to know they still matter. Your silence triggers their curiosity, and curiosity leads to the next stage. Stage 4 is where the ego steps in to protect them from vulnerability. They start rationalizing. They tell themselves you never mattered that much. They rewrite the relationship in their mind. They focus on your flaws. They magnify every conflict. They convince themselves that they're better off. This is not because they didn't feel anything. It's because feeling anything threatens their emotional defenses. Avoidants are masters of cognitive distancing. When emotions surface, they push them down by intellectualizing, minimizing, or blaming. They might think, they were too needy, we weren't compatible, I didn't really like them that much. This self-talk protects them from the fear of attachment. But here's the twist. The more they suppress, the more their subconscious processes the loss. They might dream about you. They might feel sudden sadness for no clear reason. They might feel nostalgic when hearing a song or seeing a place connected to you. Their ego says, I'm fine. Their nervous system says, something changed. And then, quietly, stage 5 begins. This is the stage most people never see because it happens beneath the avoidance awareness. It's the stage of subconscious panic. When the brain finally registers that you might not come back, that you might truly be gone, that the connection they assumed was guaranteed is no longer there, this triggers their attachment system in reverse. Avoidants fear being trapped in closeness, but they also fear being abandoned. They learn to suppress that fear by detaching first. But when someone leaves without chasing, it bypasses their defenses. They might feel sudden anxiety, a tightness in the chest, a restless feeling, a desire to reach out, a sense of loss they can't fully name. This is when they might suddenly think of texting you, calling you, or revisiting old conversations. They might feel an urge to reconnect, not from logic, but from attachment. Your absence becomes louder than your presence ever was. And this is where the emotional paradox reaches its peak. You stop chasing to find peace. They begin to feel unsettled because you stop chasing. They built their emotional strategy around people staying, people pursuing, people adjusting. When you don't, their entire attachment script gets disrupted. They may not show it, they may not admit it, they may continue acting indifferent on the surface, but internally, the system that once felt safe begins to fracture. They realize they lost something they didn't know how to appreciate. And this realization doesn't come in one dramatic moment, it comes in waves. Subtle reminders, random memories, emotional echoes. They might replay your voice in their head. Remember your kindness. Recall the way you tried. Notice the emptiness in conversations with others. They don't miss you the way anxious people miss. They miss in fragments, in delayed realizations, in moments when they least expect it. And all of this started because you stopped chasing. You didn't need to argue, you didn't need to explain, you didn't need to prove your worth, you simply removed your energy. And that silence speaks louder than any message ever could. Because chasing tells someone you're afraid to lose them, but walking away tells someone you value yourself. And that shift, more than any tactic, more than any strategy, is what triggers the deepest psychological response inside an avoidant. They feel it, they resist it, they analyze it, they suppress it, but they cannot fully escape it. The moment you stop chasing, you stop playing the role they unconsciously expected you to play, and when you change the role, the entire dynamic collapses. And this is only the beginning of the breakdown. They may not show it, they may not talk about it, but inside, something has already cracked. When you stop chasing, the avoidance emotional system doesn't just adjust, it begins to reorganize around the loss of control. Stage 6 begins quietly, and it's one of the most emotionally intense phases they go through, even if they never admit it. This is the stage of emotional nostalgia. Suddenly, memories come back, not the negative ones they used to justify their distance, but the soft ones, the moments when they felt understood, the conversations that felt safe, the laughter, the comfort of knowing someone genuinely cared. Avoidants store emotions differently. They often suppress positive attachment memories during the relationship to stay detached. But when the relationship ends, or when you emotionally withdraw, those memories resurface with surprising intensity. They might find themselves thinking about you randomly. A smell, a song, a phrase, a place can trigger a vivid emotional flashback. And for a brief moment, they feel something close to longing. This longing is confusing for them. It contradicts their identity as someone who doesn't need anyone. It threatens the emotional walls they worked so hard to build, so they may push it away again, distract themselves, or rationalize it. But the nostalgia keeps returning. They start to compare new connections with what they had with you, and often nothing feels the same, not because you were perfect, but because emotional safety is rare for avoidance, and when they feel it, it leaves a deep imprint. They might feel regret, not in a dramatic, tearful way, but in a quiet, reflective sense of, maybe I messed this up. And that leads directly into stage 7, the turning point. This is where the avoidant reaches a fork in the road. On one side, there is vulnerability, reaching out, acknowledging feelings, risking rejection. On the other side, there is deeper shutdown, more detachment, more emotional armor. Some avoidants choose to reach out. They might send a casual message. They might check in just to see how you are. They might reopen old conversations or share something meaningful. On the surface, it may seem small, but for them, it's a massive step. This is not always a confession of love. Often it's a test. They want to see if you're still there, if you still care, if the connection still exists. Others choose the opposite path. They double down on independence. They convince themselves that they're better off alone. They avoid thinking about you. They cut off reminders. They distract themselves with work, dating, or personal projects. This is not healing. This is deeper emotional shutdown. And the path they choose often depends on their level of self-awareness and emotional maturity. But no matter which path they take, something inside them has shifted permanently. Your absence forced them to confront their attachment system in a way chasing never could. Then stage 8 unfolds beneath the surface, shaping their internal world in subtle ways. They begin to question their identity. Avoidants often define themselves as independent, self-sufficient, emotionally unaffected. But when they realize they cared more than they admitted, it shakes that identity. They might wonder, why did this affect me? Why do I miss them? Why do I feel unsettled? These questions can be uncomfortable. They threaten the narrative they've built about themselves. Some avoidants use this moment as a catalyst for growth. They read about attachment styles. They reflect on their patterns. They consider therapy or self-work. Others avoid the questions entirely. They return to old patterns, repeating the cycle with new partners. But either way, your withdrawal planted a seed of awareness. And awareness, once planted, cannot be completely erased. Stage 9 is where their behavior often becomes visible to the outside world. This is when they might show signs of reaching out indirectly. They might post things meant for you to see. Quotes about missing someone. Songs about regret. Subtle messages about growth or healing. They might suddenly appear in places you frequent. They might ask mutual friends about you. This is not always manipulation. Often it's confusion. They feel something but don't know how to express it directly, so they express it sideways. They want connection without vulnerability. They want reassurance without risking rejection. They want you to notice them without them having to chase you. And this is the irony. When you stopped chasing, they began orbiting your emotional space. Then stage 10 arrives, and this is one of the most profound shifts in the entire process. They start to feel the emotional consequences of their patterns. For the first time, they may realize that their avoidance cost them something real. They might see a pattern in their past relationships. They might recognize that people often leave when they emotionally withdraw. This realization can be painful. They may feel shame, not the kind that is openly expressed, but a quiet internal discomfort. They may feel guilt for how they handled the connection. They may feel sadness for what could have been. This is not guaranteed for every avoidant, but when it happens, it is transformative. Your silence becomes a mirror. It reflects their patterns back to them. It shows them what emotional distance actually leads to. And even if they don't consciously articulate it, their nervous system registers the lesson. They learn that people do not stay forever, that emotional safety requires participation, that detachment has consequences. Meanwhile, you are on your own journey. While they are cycling through confusion, nostalgia, and internal conflict, you are reclaiming your emotional energy. You are rediscovering your worth. You are rebuilding your sense of self. And this contrast is powerful. You stopped chasing because you were tired of feeling unseen. You stopped chasing because you wanted peace. You stopped chasing because you realized love should not feel like chasing someone who keeps running. And that decision is what triggered their internal breakdown. Not because you manipulated them, not because you played games, but because you chose yourself. And that choice is something no avoidant can ignore forever. Even if they never come back, even if they never admit it, even if they move on. The moment you stopped chasing changed them, because it disrupted their emotional script. And once a script is disrupted, it can never play the same way again. In the next part, we will go even deeper into why your absence feels so threatening to them, how their inner child is activated, and why the push-pull dynamic is so addictive for both sides. There is something deeply unsettling about silence when you were once emotionally present. For someone with avoidant attachment, your absence doesn't just feel like space, it feels like a disruption in the emotional structure they unconsciously relied on. Stage 11 begins in a place they rarely admit exists, the fear beneath the fear. Avoidants are often seen as people who don't care, who detach easily, who move on without looking back. But beneath the surface, many of them carry a quiet fear that is rarely spoken about, the fear of being truly alone. They learnt early that closeness was unsafe, that depending on someone led to pain, so they adapted by needing less. But needing less is not the same as needing nothing. When you were there, chasing, trying, caring, you provided an emotional anchor. They didn't have to fully attach to feel connected. They could keep distance and still know someone cared. When you stop chasing, that anchor disappears. Suddenly, they are faced with a reality where no one is emotionally holding the connection for them, and that can feel destabilizing, even threatening. Your absence becomes a mirror reflecting a possibility they rarely confront, that they might actually want connection more than they admit. And that realization can be frightening. Stage 12 takes them even deeper, back to the emotional origins of their avoidance. This is where their inner child awakens. Many avoidants learned emotional self-reliance in childhood. They learned that expressing needs led to disappointment, that closeness could be inconsistent, overwhelming, or conditional. So they adapted by minimizing their needs, suppressing emotions, and becoming hyper-independent. When you stop chasing, it touches that old wound. The part of them that once felt unseen, unsupported, or emotionally neglected feels activated. They might not connect it consciously to childhood, but the emotional pattern is the same. Someone important is no longer emotionally available. This can trigger a deep, quiet sadness, a feeling of being left behind, a sense of emotional abandonment. But because they were taught not to feel these things, they push them down, they distract themselves, they intellectualize, they detach. Still, the inner child feels it. Your silence is not just about you. It resonates with every time they felt emotionally alone in the past. Stage 13 explains why this dynamic feels so addictive for both sides, the push-pull trauma bond. When you chased and they pulled away, it created emotional intensity. Your anxiety met their avoidance, your pursuit met their distance. This push-pull cycle releases powerful neurochemical reactions in the brain: hope, fear, relief, longing. For you, chasing felt like trying to secure love. For them, pulling away felt like regaining control. But when you stop chasing, the cycle breaks. And breaking the cycle feels destabilizing to the nervous system. Avoidants are used to being the one who withdraws. When you withdraw first, it flips the power dynamic. Their nervous system no longer recognizes the pattern. The absence of the cycle can feel like withdrawal, like something is missing, like the emotional intensity they secretly relied on is gone. This is why they sometimes feel drawn back when you pull away, not necessarily because they are suddenly secure, but because their nervous system misses the familiar rhythm of the bond. Your silence breaks the addiction. Stage 14 shifts the focus back to you, because while they are processing, something powerful is happening inside you. Stopping the chase is not just about them, it is about reclaiming your emotional sovereignty. When you stop chasing, you send a message to yourself, I matter. You stop measuring your worth by their availability. You stop shrinking your needs to fit their comfort. You stop overgiving to someone who cannot meet you halfway. This shift is not just psychological, it's energetic. Your posture changes, your communication changes, your self-perception changes. You become less reactive, less desperate, more grounded, and that energy is felt, even from a distance. Avoidance often sense when someone has truly detached emotionally. It feels different from silent protest or temporary withdrawal. It feels final, grounded, self-possessed. And that is what makes it so powerful. Stage 15 is about how secure energy changes everything. When you embody emotional security, you stop chasing and start attracting healthier dynamics. You become more selective. You set boundaries without guilt. You express needs without fear. Secure energy is calm, confident, and non-attached to outcomes. This energy often feels magnetic to avoidance, but also challenging because it does not chase, it does not beg, it does not collapse. It simply exists. And when an avoidant senses secure energy, they are faced with a choice: rise to meet it or walk away. Either way, you win, because you are no longer chasing someone who cannot meet you where you are. You are no longer negotiating your worth. You are no longer sacrificing your emotional needs to keep someone who keeps leaving. You are choosing yourself, and that choice, more than anything else, is what truly transforms the dynamic. In the final part, we will explore real-life signs they are going through these stages, the mistakes people make after pulling away, how to heal fully from avoidant connections, and a powerful emotional closing message that will leave you grounded, empowered, and free. When you step back from an avoidant, there are signs, small, quiet, sometimes confusing signs, that show they are going through these internal stages. Most people miss them. They expect dramatic confessions or emotional breakdowns, but avoidants rarely express their emotional process directly. They reveal it in patterns, shifts, and subtle behaviors. They might suddenly become more active on social media. They might post quotes about growth, loss, or self-reflection. They might watch your stories consistently, but never react. They might reach out with a neutral message that feels oddly timed. They might ask how you are, then disappear again. They might talk about you to mutual friends. They might seem distant, but strangely aware of your life. These are fragments of an internal process. They don't fully understand themselves. They are trying to locate you emotionally without exposing themselves. They are trying to feel connected without risking vulnerability. They are trying to regain control without chasing. And sometimes they are simply processing the loss in the only way they know how, silently. This is why people often misinterpret avoidance. Silence does not mean absence of feeling. Distance does not mean indifference. Avoidants feel deeply, but they learn to survive by disconnecting from those feelings. Your withdrawal brings those feelings to the surface. But there is a critical moment after you pull away where many people make painful mistakes. They break their own silence too soon. They send a message to check if the avoidant misses them. They stalk their social media and spiral into self-doubt. They overanalyze every small sign. They wait for validation instead of building their own sense of worth. They stop chasing externally, but continue chasing internally. And that internal chase keeps you emotionally tied to someone who may or may not be capable of meeting you. When you pull away, the real work begins inside you. Healing from an avoidant connection is not about getting them back. It is about breaking the cycle that made you feel responsible for their emotions, their distance, and their growth. You heal by recognizing that love is not chasing, love is not convincing someone to stay, love is not shrinking yourself to be digestible. You heal by learning to self-soothe, to communicate your needs clearly, to choose partners who can meet you emotionally. You heal by releasing the fantasy of who they could be and accepting who they are. You heal by turning the energy you poured into them back toward yourself. This is not easy. Trauma bonds are powerful, attachment wounds are deep, hope can be intoxicating, but awareness is the beginning of freedom. And when you truly begin to heal, something profound happens. You stop measuring your worth by their behavior. You stop waiting for their messages to validate you. You stop analyzing their silence as a reflection of your value. You become emotionally independent, not in an avoidant way, but in a grounded, secure way. And that is when everything changes. Whether they come back or not becomes irrelevant. Whether they miss you or not becomes secondary. Whether they finally realize what they lost becomes optional information. Because you realize something far more important. You were never meant to chase someone who keeps running. You were meant to be met, to be chosen, to be valued without having to prove your worth. When you stopped chasing, you didn't just trigger a breakdown inside them, you triggered a breakthrough inside yourself. You broke a pattern, you rewrote a script, you stepped out of a role that drained you. And that is the most powerful thing you can ever do in any relationship. If they reach out, you will see them clearly. If they don't, you will still be whole. If they change, you can decide if you still want them. If they don't, you will not lose yourself waiting. You are no longer the person who begs for connection. You are the person who chooses connection. And that shift is not just emotional. It is spiritual. It is psychological. It is energetic. You stopped chasing. And in doing so, you found yourself. And that, more than any reaction they could ever have, is the true ending of this story.